If you enjoy what you hear here today, please consider supporting me on my Patreon page. Every dollar helps, and you get to see content that you won't see here. Chapter 18. On this night. As Silver stepped out the front door, he reactivated the illusion spell, looking for all the world like a light gray ponykin wearing a smart tuxedo. Behind him, Twilight shut the door and placed a big bowl of candy on one of the exposed roots of the tree, quickly attaching a note that said, "Please take one," in bright red ink. Underneath it, Silver noticed that she had written, "or else," and had punctuated it with a crude drawing of a skull and crossbones. Silver eyed the bowl wearily. "You think that'll make them only take one?" he asked her dubiously. She shot him a grin.
"The note? No, I'm sure that there'll be a few who will try to get more than their fair share,"
she replied. Silver blinked. "Try?" Twilight smirked.
"Yes, try. And fail. Ultimately, when they get shocked by 20 megawatts when their hoof gets too close for the second time, or when they try to pick up more than one."
Silver could detect a hint of mischievous pride in her voice as she spoke. "Is that safe?" Silver asked, eyeing the little scroll and crossbones on the note with concern. Twilight merely laughed.
"Oh, sure. All it will really do is give them a little sting and make their manes stand on end. Besides, I don't expect two moony ponies to get too grabby. Not after what happened last year."
She chuckled diabolically.
Pinkie still can't look at chili peppers without wincing.
After a quick mental debate, Silver decided that he did not want to know what had befallen the poor hyperactive mare.
"Now, where did Spike get off to?"
Twilight mused to herself, eyeing the streets around them. Silver joined her, taking in the Nightmare Night decor for the first time. Silver's eyes, unseen to Twilight due to the illusory magical shroud covering his face, widened considerably as he beheld Ponyville in all of its festive glory. He thought he knew what to expect for the oncoming night, having seen the town's preparations in the daylight, but now that the sun had dipped its head below the horizon to make way for the moon's journey across the sky, he realized that he had only caught a glimpse of what had been to come. In the few hours that Silver had last stepped outside, Ponyville had undergone a transformation. There wasn't a single building, Silver could see, that wasn't intricately and enthusiastically designed. Artificial spiderwebs that glowed in the dark laced the houses. Animatronic machines of various monsters groaned, growled, and screamed at ponies passing by. There were even a few homemade haunted houses, tents, and sheds that had been repurposed to scare little fillies and colts. It almost seemed to each house, shop, and pony was competing with each other to see who could best embody the Nightmare Night spirit. "Wow," Silver muttered under his breath as he spied a group of children run screaming from a large standing coffin that had burst open to reveal a stumbling pony wrapped in bandages. A chuckle came from beside him.
"Yeah. Wow."
Silver looked at Twilight curiously, and she smiled.
Ponyville goes really overboard when it comes to holidays, especially when a princess is involved. Especially when they feel they need to make up for last year.
Silver nodded his understanding and went back to searching for the little dragon assistant, but was distracted by an excitable chorus of, "Nightmare night, what a fright, give us something sweet to bite." Silver spied a group made up of one mare in a strange green costume with a smattering of fillies and colts standing at the doorway of the home of an elderly mare who dropped a few pieces of candy into each one's outstretched bag or pumpkin-shaped bucket. Further inspection made him realize that not all of the children were ponies. "There he is," Silver said as he pointed out the group to Twilight, where two stubby purple legs and the tip of a green spine could be seen just under and over the ponies. Twilight looked over and smiled with amusement.
"Ah, you're right. And if I'm not mistaken, that one he is with could only be... Twilight!"
A high-pitched voice pealed through the air, cutting Twilight off as the pony dressed in the strange costume, a dragon maybe, darted over them faster than the eye could follow and shoved her face in Twilight's.
Can you believe this? Would you just look at all of the decorations? I've never seen Ponyville look so nightmare nighty.
She stepped to the side and put both of her hooves on Twilight's face and directed her attention to various points of interest.
There's ghosts and witches and ghouls and zombies and mummies, and there's Buckuff and the Arachnopony and the Moth Pony and Slenderman and...
Her flow of words was interrupted as she turned her pink face towards Silverquill. Her eyes widened and her pupils dilated as she took in his macabre appearance.
Whoa!
Silver smirked as Twilight flailed helplessly, trying to dislodge her face from the two hooves that were smushing her cheeks together.
Pinkie, let go of me!
Pinkie blinked before laughing and releasing Twilight's head.
Oh, sorry, Twilight.
She giggled as the unicorn puffed out her cheeks angrily. Silver couldn't help but chuckle, and Pinkie's attention was brought right back to him.
Silverquill, is that you in there?
Silver dematerialized his illusion and shot the mare a wink.
Oh, that is so cool!
She exclaimed gleefully.
You actually scared me for a second there.
Silver smiled and nodded humbly, pleased at the reception of his well-thought-out costume. And what are you supposed to be, Pinkie? Some kind of lizard? Pinkie snorted and shook her head.
I'm dressed as an alligator,
she replied happily.
and Gummy here.
She shook her mane, causing a small reptilian creature wearing a shoddily put-together pink costume of a pony, complete with cardboard ears and a wiry pink mane, to pop out of her hair.
Is a Pinkie Pie.
The alligator dressed as a pony blinked at Silverquill, and Silverquill blinked right back. But my costume is even better. A chipper voice perched from next to Silverquill, who looked down to see Spike standing with a proud grin on his face. It's got blood and everything. Silver patted the little dragon on the head reassuringly. You got that right, Spike, he said without a hint of sarcasm. Pinkie Pie giggled.
There you are, Spike. I wondered where you managed to get off to.
Twilight said as she noticed her assistant had returned. She walked over and rubbed the spines on his head fondly.
Are you ready to go?
The dragon suddenly looked down and started to shuffle his feet. Yeah, about that, he said uncertainly. Twilight cocked her head curiously. I was wondering if I could go with Pinkie and the others instead, he asked hopefully, gesturing to a group of costumed fillies and colts standing by the side. They waved as Twilight and Silver looked over in their direction. A look of confusion passed over Twilight's face.
Oh, I see. Sorta.
She looked at the little dragon doubtfully.
Are you sure?
Spike nodded enthusiastically. Please? He asked imploringly. Pinkie darted to his side and lowered her head so that it was next to Spike's. The two then proceeded to unleash their best puppy eyes against the poor, outmatched mare. Pretty please? They said in unison. Twilight looked at the two of them, nearly prostrating themselves before her with bafflement.
Well, I don't see why not.
The two erupted in cheers, Pinkie leaping and throwing her hooves into the air, and Spike excitedly running off to join the other fillies and colts after a quick thank you. Twilight looked at Pinkie Pie worriedly.
Are you sure that you can handle all of those children?
Pinkie waved a hoof dismissively.
Please. If I can handle Pumpkin and Pound for an entire weekend, I can handle a few kids for a few hours.
Twilight raised a dubious eyebrow before nodding in acquiescence.
Besides,
Pinkie's smile turned mischievous as her eyes narrowed.
I think you two wouldn't mind spending the night alone.
It took all of Silver's self-discipline to not react as his thoughts were sent racing. What does she mean by that? Does she know about Twilight and I? Is she trying to set us up? How did she even figure that out?
Pinkie sense,
The mare inexplicably said, causing Silver's blood to run cold and Twilight's brow to furrow in confusion. Oh, Celestia, she can read my mind. Quick, what number am I thinking of? Pinkie merely smirked at Silver like an adult would to a child who thought they had outsmarted it.
well, sorry guys, but I gotta go. Time is candy, and I'm wasting candy right now.
She pulled a ticking stopwatch out of her mane and glanced at it before shoving it back inside of her curls.
Silver, would you be so kind as to put your blank face thingy back on?
Silver raised an eyebrow and nodded. A quick spell made his face as blank as a canvas once more, and Pinkie nodded in satisfaction before walking over to stand with the children who were eagerly waiting for her.
All right, every pony,
She said loudly.
just like we practiced. On 3.
She then slowly counted to 3, at which point she leaped into the air and screeched as loud as she could,
Slenderman! Run!
Her cries were joined by those of the children, and soon there was a small stampede of yelling ponies and one dragon tearing down the street. Twilight chuckled heartily as Silver stared on in bafflement.
Well, looks like it's just you and me, Slenderman.
Twilight said with amusement as she watched the receding dust cloud of the fleeing ponies and dragons. Silver was glad that his illusion covered the broad smile he was wearing. Looks like it. Come on up, y'all, and try your hoof at bobbing for an apple. Silver eyed Twilight dubiously. Her head was submerged in a barrel full of water in an effort to catch an apple in her mouth. She had been in there for about half a minute, however, and Silver was starting to get worried. She does know you're supposed to come up for air, right? He thought. His discomfort grew as the seconds ticked on, and Silver was mere moments away from tapping her on the shoulder when she burst out of the barrel gasping for breath. Silver raised his eyebrow at her as she panted for breath, her mane sopping wet and falling in front of her eyes. Did you get one? He asked pleasantly. He got a scowl in return.
No.
Twilight grumbled unhappily. Silver smirked. Really? Because from the looks of it... He reached his hoof up to her forehead and gently removed the apple that had been impaled to the core by her horn and held it up for her inspection. You seem to have done pretty well. Twilight stared at the apple for a moment before bursting out laughing. Silver couldn't help but join her. Step right up and take a shot. See how well you can launch a pumpkin, get a bullseye, and win a prize. Silver closed one eye and aimed the catapult carefully at the set up bullseye target down the lane of the catapult. Satisfied with his alignment, he pulled the lever that took off the locking mechanism, causing the catapult to fling the pumpkin in the air where it sailed over the target and landed in a bale of hay directly behind it. He face-huffed as Twilight giggled behind him.
Well, look on the bright side, Silver. If Canterlot is ever attacked, you won't have to defend the walls.
Silver rolled his eyes. All right then, little Miss Marksmere, why don't you try it? He retorted. Twilight grinned at him.
I thought you'd never ask.
Silver eyed the mirror as she confidently walked past him and set a fresh pumpkin on the arm of the catapult. It's a lot harder than it looks, you know. Twilight smirked.
Oh, please. It's all just angles and vectors.
Silver narrowed his eyes at her, a sinking feeling setting in his stomach as he watched her critically eye the catapult and the target. Eventually, satisfied with herself, she carefully adjusted the catapult and hit the release. The pumpkin flew through the air and straight into the target that Silver had missed. Twilight turned around to see him with an expression that suggested he had been tasting something very sour.
Hey, Silver.
Yeah?
Would you mind taking off that illusion?
Why?
Well, I'd like to be able to see your face is all.
Oh, sure.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
Plus, it looks really creepy.
Ah. Silver and Twilight walked amicably along one of Ponyville's many wide dirt roads, Twilight happily humming to herself and Silver enviously eyeing the large stuffed witch that she had won that was currently riding on her back. He didn't begrudge her win, he just really wanted that bat plushie. It might have made a good gift for Luna. A realization struck Silverquill. Hey, Twilight, he said, turning to the mare. She ceased her humming and looked at him expectantly. It just occurred to me that we haven't seen Luna yet. Why is that?
Oh, she isn't scheduled to come until the moon has reached its precipice in the sky,
she explained, looking up to see the bright celestial figure staring down at them.
And by the looks of it, it won't be long until then. We should probably be heading to the square by now.
Twilight gestured for him to follow, and she turned onto the main road. Silver cocked his head as he followed. What happens at the square? Twilight smiled impishly.
Oh, you'll see,
she replied mysteriously. Silver merely shrugged and continued walking. Many ponies were walking in the same direction as they, he realized, and in only a few minutes they reached the town square where a throng of ponies had gathered in front of a raised stage and were waiting expectantly. Whatever this is, it should be interesting, Silver mused as they joined the crowd. He noticed that the ones closest to the stage were all fillies and colts, clutching at and eating from large bags and buckets of candy, muttering amongst each other excitedly and looking around impatiently. Before Silver could comment on this, the air thrummed with the sound of the clock tower bell ringing through the air, the slow and ominous tone bringing a hush down on the ponies assembled. The children's muttering ceased as they looked around excitedly huddled together, shaking with equal amounts of fear and excitement. The adults smiled at the sound and rested their gazes on the stage, waiting patiently and expectantly. Silver looked around in confusion as the bell rang again and again, until eventually petering out into a silence that was even more spooky than the haunting noise that had been making. The crowd was slowly getting larger and larger as the seconds ticked past, and almost the entire space around the stage had been taken up by ponies drawn to the mysterious noise. He glanced at Twilight, looking for some answers, but she only winked at him and looked to the stage. What in the world are these ponies waiting for? Silver blinked in surprise as a green cloud of smoke appeared on the stage, enveloping the entire platform and swirling around the hooves of the ponies in the front. A few fillies and colts let out startled squeals, but besides that, every pony was dead silent. A silhouette appeared in the middle of the fog, standing completely still as every pony watched it with bated breath. After a long and suitably dramatic silence, it started to speak in low, foreboding female voice.
Come, little ponies, gather all round, listen very closely and make not a sound.
A pair of thin, glowing yellow eyes appeared in what had to be the head of the creature. It looked like a pony, but Silver couldn't be sure. No pony he knew of had eyes of that shape, or spoke with that foreign sounding of an accent that suggested they weren't entirely comfortable with the language. It did, however, make for a very spooky image.
The night sees all. It knows all you fear, and if you are not very careful...
The voice chuckled darkly for a moment.
It might take all you hold dear.
Silver felt a shiver run up and down his spine, and smiled despite himself when he heard a few of the assorted children let out whimpers. This was turning out to be far more amusing than he thought it would be.
But fret not, little ones, all is not lost. The night it will spare you, for a cost.
The smoke was beginning to dissipate now, that had dispersed amongst the crowd as a sickly green fog that curled along their hooves. Silver idly wondered if it was safe to breathe in.
Yes, little ones, your safety will not be free, and if you do not share your spoils this night, will come for thee.
The voice hissed the last few words, sending one plum-colored filly scurrying under her mother's legs.
Come now, my little ponies, let us work through our fright.
The silhouette walked forward out of the thinning fog to reveal a pony wrapped in a dark brown cloak that hid all but her glowing eyes.
And if we are lucky, we shall live through the night.
With another flash of smoke, the cloaked pony vanished from the stage. Silver looked around in confusion before a voice called out from behind them.
This way, quickly! We are almost out of time. If we do not hurry, I fear we will fall behind. The night waits for no pony, and I fear what may happen if we do not hurry," she said urgently. The children squealed and darted after the robed figure, who Silver now realized was actually a zebra, once he noticed she had lowered her hood to reveal a gray face framed by a black and white mane that had rings and fake spiders intertwined in braids. They crowded along her hooves, desperately trying to get her to walk by pushing at her legs as they jabbered nonsensically in their panic. Silver, along with most of the other assorted ponies, smiled. Twilight chuckled as she watched the zebra herd the children away from the stage.
Well, I guess we'd better follow them before Nightmare Moon comes for us.
Silver smiled. "Yeah, right," he said with amusement before catching the strange look on her face. You're not serious, right?"
Of course I am, Silver,
she replied flatly and somewhat reproachfully.
This is no joking matter.
Silver blinked. Of course. How silly of me." Silver nodded and faced forward once again, betraying not a hint of emotion besides cool indifference that rendered Silverquill thoroughly confused. The group of ponies walked for about 5 minutes, the air filled with the chattering of children hopped up on sugar and fear, as well as adults who were watching them with a combination of amusement and bemusement, before the procession came to a standstill. A hush fell across the group as they beheld their destination, and Silver curiously examined his new surroundings. They were on the outskirts of Ponyville, in front of a lone statue that Silver had never seen before. It was a stone representation of the tyrant of the night, Nightmare Moon, who was rearing in the air threateningly with her wings splayed behind her and her mane flowing dramatically. Her head was angled so that it gave the impression that she was looking down upon the assembled ponies with a wicked grin on her face that showed off her large and pointed fangs.
"Behold, for this is the very face of fear," the zebra chanted in her low and melodious voice, causing the fillies and colts to cower around her legs. "The one that can stop your heart with simply a leer." She eyed a nearby filly menacingly, causing her to squeal and hide behind her equally scared friend. "The eater of ponies, the bringer of doom. This is the one they call Nightmare Moon." The night sky was illuminated by a sudden and unexpected crack of lightning, followed by a boom of thunder, eliciting startled shouts from children and adults alike. "Quickly, ponies, now comes the spectrum," the zebra cried frantically, addressing the assorted fillies and colts who were gazing at her with wide-eyed terror. "Offer up your spoils, or else she'll gobble up your bottoms." Another bolt of lightning tore through the sky, and Silverquill could just make out the silhouette of a pony with large wings that blotted out the moon in the sky against the blinding light. A menacing chuckle ran through the air, and Silver felt his blood run cold as he was assaulted by thoughts of endless darkness and disharmony. Instead of gasping or shouting, however, something that most ponies around him had taken to doing, he cocked his head curiously, for he recognized that voice, although something was slightly off about it. What in the world? The children did not share his curiosity. Almost as though a switch had been flipped in their little heads, each one rushed to the statue and quickly dropped hefty amounts of candy at its base before returning to the hooves of the zebra and huddling together for safety as they fearfully looked around for the source of the laughing. Finally, the amused laughing stopped, only to be replaced by a voice that reverberated with authority and power, the voice of a queen. "Finally, I have returned,"
the voice announced triumphantly.
"Now I am free to roam Equestria and devour every single one of its foolish ponies."
A collective gasp ran through the crowd.
"And there is nothing any pony can do about it to stop me, for I am..."
Another flash of lightning split the sky and landed right in front of the statue, the ground erupting with dirt and dust.
"Nightmare Moon!"
As the dust settled, the form of a tall and slender pony came into view. Her coat was as black as obsidian, and her wings were extended to their full, impressive length. She reared her head back and laughed proudly, her long horn and ornate armor glinting against the moonlight. Silver's eyes widened as she laughed, a cliché and slightly overdone mwahahaha that had the entire group of ponies rooted to the spot, although for different reasons for some. Personally, Silver found it far more amusing and interesting than it was terrifying, but that was just him. She eventually quieted and turned her eyes towards them with a fanged grin. And Silver was shocked to see that she had glowing green eyes with thin pupils, like that of a cat.
And I think,
she said quietly to herself, but not so quietly that the assorted ponies couldn't hear her,
that I'll start by eating these ponies.
The volume of the scream that rose from the throats of the fillies and colts could put the biggest and most ferocious dragon's roar to shame. And over it all, Nightmare Moon just laughed menacingly, baring her sharp fangs for all to see.
Now, children, we must gallop! Quickly, before she gobbles you up!
The zebra cried, taking off down the road back to Ponyville. The children didn't hesitate in following her, and soon the sound of little hooves running and voices screaming for their lives filled the air, soon followed by the few nonplussed adults that had accompanied them. Twilight and Silver were the only ones who remained to listen to Nightmare Moon laughing menacingly. But to Silver's utter confusion, she was starting to sound less like an evil queen ready to enslave the world, and more like she was just told a really good joke. Finally, she stopped her chuckling and wiped an unseen tear from her eye.
Oh, aren't they just adorable when running for their lives?
She said fondly as she smiled toward the receding dust cloud. Twilight smirked and nodded before walking up to the tyrant.
They sure are, Princess. I'm glad you could make it.
Nightmare Moon grinned down at the mare, her demonic eyes that could outstare a cockatrice flashing with mirth.
As am I, Twilight Sparkle, and I am most pleased to see you again.
She looked up and caught Silver's eye, and her grin grew wider.
Silver Quill, how fortuitous. I was hoping that I'd be able to catch you on this night.
His mouth twitched into a smile. Is that so? She nodded formally.
Indeed. 'Twould be unfortunate if I had been to Ponyville and missed you before the night was over. I've been looking forward to seeing you again greatly.
Twilight smirked and raised an eyebrow from where she stood as Silver nodded his understanding. I was hoping to see you as well, Luna, he replied, eyeing her jet black coat and ornate purple armor with interest. Or would you prefer I called you Nightmare Moon? Luna blinked and smiled.
Ah, you refer to my appearance?
She looked down and examined a metal-clad forehoof. Silver nodded bemusedly and Luna chuckled.
Apparently, the townsponys think it amusing to be scared on this, so I have taken to dressing up and joining in the festivities. Now that that's done, though.
Her horn lit up brightly, and her entire body was covered in a bright light for just a moment before it disappeared to reveal the real Princess of the Night, as she should be, without cat eyes or fangs, grinning down at him. She adopted a thoughtful look.
I must admit, I do not entirely understand the amusement that comes from being scared, but ponies will be ponies, I suppose.
Silver couldn't help but crack a grin. Now that he thought about it, he realized that there had indeed been a few heartfelt laughs among the earlier screaming, and a couple of smiles amid the terrified faces. That was just like the ponies of Ponyville, he figured. Get the Princess of the Night, one of the most powerful and important ponies in all of Equestria, who has lived through hundreds of wars and thousands of years, to stop by and play with the fillies and colts and maybe some games if she had time. This place is weird, he thought to himself. He was torn away from his thoughts by Twilight explaining to Luna why ponies found being scared to be entertaining, and Luna listening with a blank expression.
It's all because the fear is implied, you see? Because there's no actual danger involved. Fear invokes a primal fight-or-flight response, one that most ponies do not feel in their day-to-day lives. But because they know there's no actual danger to them, they get to revel in the feeling without having to worry about being hurt.
Luna's expression stayed blank and confused, causing Twilight to groan slightly.
It's like the feeling of adrenaline you feel when riding on a roller coaster. Normally you'd only be able to get that type of rush from a dangerous situation, like falling to your doom from a cliff. But because you know you're not going to flatten yourself on the ground, it's fun. Do you see what I mean?
Twilight looked imploringly at the princess, looking hopeful when she opened her mouth to reply.
I think, Twilight Sparkle, Luna said as she caught Silver's eye and winked, that you need to get out more often.
And with that, she patted the baffled unicorn on the head comfortingly and started to make her way down the road back to Ponyville.
Come now, you two. There is revelry to be had and games to be played.
But I don't.
Twilight stammered as she watched the alicorn walk away. She turned to face Silver with a look of confusion, an expression that looked very odd on her.
I don't need to get out more. Do I?
Silver walked over and laid a hoof on her shoulder.
Twilight, you're perfect just the way you are.
Twilight blushed and smiled before quickly leaning over and giving him a small kiss on the cheek.
Thanks.
Silver fought to keep his composure.
Don't mention it, he said with what he hoped was a formal nod. We should probably follow Luna before she uses the Royal Canterlot voice on us.
Twilight giggled and nodded, and the two ponies hurried down the road after the alicorn, unaware of the broad smiles they wore. The three ponies quickly reached Ponyville, their walk filled with the princess quickly catching up with the lives of Twilight and Silver and vice versa. They filled her in on the goings-on of the town, few as they were, and she regaled them with tales of courtly politics and subterfuge. Right now, she was telling them about a particular noble who had tried to petition for the Night Guards, Princess Luna's personal guards, much like the Royal Guard were Celestia's, to be given cloaks and masks to wear because their bat-like features were deemed to be a terrible eyesore.
And then the fool had the cheek to try and gain support from the best of the petitioners, noble and common alike, with me sitting right in front of him.
She shook her head and blew air out of her nose.
They, of course, wanted nothing to do with him, as most ponies, unlike him, are capable of telling their flank from their fetlock. But still, the insult remains. Why, if it were 1,000 years ago, I would have tied his hoofs together and let the noble's children use him as a piñata, but no. Sally says that would be barbaric, and that...
Silver nodded knowingly as she ranted, only really half listening to her words, as he made appropriate responses and expressions as he needed to. He didn't mean to not pay much attention to her, he really didn't. He valued her friendship too much. He just found the topic of courtroom politics to be more mentally tiring than trying to remember the square roots of 7-digit numbers. He never had much of a head for math, or for ponies for that matter. Luna spoke for a few more minutes before thankfully changing the subject.
So, Silver, what have you been up to since arriving in Ponyville? Have you any luck in banishing that writer's block, as you so call it?
Silver smiled happily, more so to himself than to Luna.
I'm getting there, thankfully.
I've been spending most of my time just enjoying myself, taking a break from the city and all, and it's really helped me. Silver breathed deeply through his nose and sighed blissfully as the smell of pine and fresh grass filled him.
Ponyville really is a great place, he muttered absently.
Luna's eyes twinkled as she looked at her friend walking alongside her with a contemplative look and a content smile on his face.
Oh, really?
She replied easily.
What do you like about it so much? The scenery? The location?
She leaned in a little bit closer.
Or is it the ponies, perchance?
Twilight gave the two a confused look but said nothing.
The ponies, probably,
Silver replied. They're all so genuinely welcoming and friendly. Not like in Canterlot or Las Pegasus or some other big city, where half of the ponies who seem likable just want something from you. He glanced over at Twilight, who was walking beside him and listening with interest. Here, if some pony smiles at you, it's because they're being friendly, not because they want you to buy something for them. Twilight and Luna nodded knowingly.
Ah,
the Princess of the Night said absently.
Yes, it is true that Canterlot has a few too many nobles, politicians, and aristocrats than is good for it.
She thought for a moment before shaking her head and smiling pleasantly.
Well, no need to dwell on that,
she said abruptly.
Ponyville is a special place, filled with special ponies. Wouldn't you agree?
She asked pleasantly, addressing both ponies who looked at each other with some measure of confusion. They nodded uncertainly, causing a smile to blossom on Luna's face.
Yes, indeed. Very special ponies,
she continued absent-mindedly, shooting Silver a sideways glance.
Why, I would even go so far as to say that if one were to court a Ponyvillian pony, one would be a very happy pony indeed.
Twilight cocked her head as Silver narrowed his eyes suspiciously. What is she getting at? He thought. Luna may seem silly and childish at times, but she was no fool, Silver knew. She knew her way around complicated political conspiracies more than he knew the back of his own hoof, and Silver couldn't help but think that she was hinting at something. Before he could question the Night Princess any further, he realized that they had just walked back into town and were approaching the festivities, judging by the sounds of laughter and screaming in the air. Luna stood at attention once she noticed they had arrived, and grinned excitedly.
Oh dear, it seems that I am needed elsewhere,
she said with mock regret.
I'm afraid we must part ways now. Maybe we'll be able to see one another again before the night is over,
She didn't give them a chance to respond, as she lit her horn and vanished in a brief flash of light, only to be replaced by the menacing-looking Nightmare Moon. She shot them one last grin, making them wince at the sight of her sharp fangs, and with one mighty flap of her wings, she took off into the air towards the center of the town.
Behold, subjects! Your new queen has arrived!
She bellowed triumphantly, a crack of lightning splitting the sky as she spoke. From where Silver stood, he could hear a resounding chorus of screams arise as ponies beheld the evil queen. Silver and Twilight chuckled as they resumed walking, unconsciously stepping a little bit closer to one another now that they were alone. A few minutes passed in blissful silence between the two ponies. As though by some unspoken agreement, they were not walking anywhere in particular. However, one would randomly turn down a random corner, and as though they were coordinating telepathically, the other would immediately follow. What do you want to do now? Silver asked absently. Twilight thought for a moment before answering.
Nothing.
Silver looked at her in surprise. Nothing? No more games? No more candy? Nothing? She nodded happily.
Nothing. I'm feeling kind of tired, to be honest.
She turned her bright eyes to Silver and bored through him with her gaze.
I was hoping we might be able to find somewhere quiet and just, I don't know, rest.
Silver was quiet for a moment. He thought of all the games and activities that were going on in Ponyville right this second, and he thought of all the delicious candy to be had. He thought of all the ponies to see and talk to, and whether or not he was willing to miss out on all of that excitement. He was an introverted pony, that was for sure, but he still liked to be around good ponies and have fun, and Ponyville had both in spades. But his decision wasn't long coming. That sounds like a good idea. It has been a long night, hasn't it? As he spoke, he realized the truth to his words and the wisdom to Twilight's suggestion. His legs all of a sudden felt like there were weights on his hooves, and his head drooped a bit as the accumulating events crashed down on him with a wave of fatigue. He suppressed a yawn and smiled. Did you have any place in mind? Twilight nodded, her face showing hints of the same fatigue that he felt.
There's a pond not too far from here, straight down the road,
she replied, pointing to the left where an unkempt dirt road lay, winding up and down over a small hill just beside an old barn. With no more delay, the two ponies made their way down the dirt road and over the hill, where they came across a small pond, filled with cattails and lily pads illuminated by the moonlight. June bugs and fireflies flitted around the air above the pond and through the bushes reeds, their bioluminescent lights looking for all the world like miniature stars that had come down to explore the world they had only ever seen from above. The two ponies hummed contentedly. Silver was instantly reminded of his own little patch of solitude back in Canterlot in one of the lesser-visited forest parks. How fitting, then, that a place that he would normally go to escape other ponies, he now used to be with them. Or rather, one pony in particular. An oak tree immediately caught Silver's attention, and he pointed it out to Twilight with a brief nod in its direction. She nodded her assent, and the two quickly made their way to the base of the tree, where they sat down and leaned against the trunk with a sigh. A breeze swept across the grass and tickled their fur, sending chills up and down Silver's spine. A feeling of something pressing up on his shoulder surprised him, and he looked down to see that Twilight was leaning her body against his and resting her head on his shoulder. He felt heat in his cheeks as he looked down at the mare, her eyes closed in bliss. Her straight mane brushed up against his side, sending shivers where it brushed against him. He couldn't help but tense slightly, in both nervousness and excitement, when he looked at her, so beautiful in ways he couldn't even begin to describe. She must have felt him tense underneath her, as her eyes opened and looked up at him nervously, seemingly worried that she might be getting a bit too personal. She blinked, and Silver could see that she was about to move away. Before she could, however, he quickly raised a foreleg and laid it across her back and onto her shoulder, furthest from him, gently pulling her just a little bit closer. She gave him a brilliant smile before cooing softly and closing her eyes once more against him. Solitude has its merits, Silver thought slowly and deliberately as he gazed down at the softly smiling mare, bangs framing her face like a beautiful painting. Without thinking, Silver leaned his head over her, laying his cheek on her soft mane like a pillow made of the finest down. He instinctively positioned his horn perpendicular to hers, something that spoke volumes about his feelings for the mare. For a unicorn, their horn is the catalyst for their magic, and their magic is the essence of their very being. Crossing horns was a way of saying that their souls and hearts, the very things that defined them as ponies, were intertwined. Yes, it has merits, he repeated in his mind. But if living in solitude means not being able to be with her? With Twilight? The mare in question hummed softly to herself and nuzzled Silver's neck, burying her head just a little bit deeper into his shoulder. Well, that just won't do it all, he mused as he turned his head slightly and gently planted his lips onto her head, just behind her horn, causing her to smile, and him to as well.